All right, so today we're diving into a story, one that's, well, fascinating and a little bit wild. A story about internet fame, cryptocurrency, and some pretty serious accusations. You ready for this?
Oh, absolutely. This one's got it all. Viral memes, a meme coin that exploded and then imploded, and a whole lot of drama.
Yeah, it's the Tuah girl, Hayley Welch. Remember her?
Of course, who could forget that catchphrase? Went super viral.
So, well, she tries to turn that internet fame, into a crypto fortune with her own cryptocurrency. Shock.
Shock, yeah, and things did not exactly go according to plan.
That's putting it lightly. We're talking about a meme coin that for a hot minute had a market cap of almost $500 million.
Yeah, almost $500 million. And then poof, gone practically overnight.
It's like watching a rocket launch and then explode midair. Just boom, all gone.
Wild, right? And there's so many players in this saga, too. You've got Welch herself, her manager, Johnny Forster, this mysterious team behind the launch called Over Here. And then, of course, you have CoffeeZilla.
Oh, yeah. Can't forget CoffeeZilla, the crypto investigator extraordinaire.
He really dove deep into this one and uncovered some, well, let's just say some questionable stuff.
Before we get into all that, though, I think it's worth taking a step back and reminding everyone where this whole Tuah thing even came from.
Okay, yeah, so for those who need a refresher, the Tuah meme, it started with this really random street interview.
Right, totally random.
Welch, she was asked a question, and her answer, well, it was pretty unique.
Unique is one way to put it.
The internet, of course, loved it. The memes, they were everywhere. She became a viral sensation practically overnight.
And she's not the first person to try to capitalize on that kind of viral fame.
Oh, no, not at all. It seems like everyone who goes viral these days wants to launch a merch line, a podcast, or, a cryptocurrency.
Meme coins, they're not your typical investment. It's not like buying Bitcoin or Ethereum or something, right?
Right, yeah, very different. Meme coins are incredibly volatile. It's like the Wild West of crypto.
So what makes them so different? Like, what makes them so risky?
Well, first of all, meme coins, they're driven by hype, by online communities, not by underlying value or technology. They're all about speculation, about riding the wave of popularity.
So basically, it's a gamble.
Pretty much. And that makes them super susceptible to manipulation, which is exactly what some people are accusing Welch and her team of doing.
Oh, yeah, the whole pump and dump scheme. We'll definitely get into that. But first, let's go back to the shock launch. I mean, people were excited about her.
Oh, yeah, for sure. People love Welch. They see her launching a coin, and it's like everyone wants in.
So what happened? Take us through it.
Okay, so the launch, it's a frenzy. Shock takes off like a rocket. I mean, it's soaring over 900% in just a few hours. I think for a minute there, the price hit 0.00000000028.
And then the crash. What happened? What caused it to plummet like that?
Well, that's where those pump and dump accusations come in. That's when CoffeeZilla's investigation starts to get really interesting.
He's been investigating crypto scams for years, right?
Yeah, he's like the internet's crypto detective.
So what did he find? What's the theory here?
The theory is, and CoffeeZilla, he lays out a lot of evidence to support this, that insiders, and that potentially includes Welch and her team, had early access to shock tokens. They got them at much, much lower prices than the public.
Okay, and then what?
Then they basically hyped the coin up, got everyone all excited, drove up the demand, and the price, of course, followed. And then at the peak, bam, they dumped all their holdings.
Leaving everyone else holding the bag.
Exactly, a classic pump and dump.
It's like a rigged game. That's messed up.
It is. And CoffeeZilla's evidence, like I said, it's pretty damning. For example, he found that on launch day, insiders got a whopping 17% of the total token supply, while the public, everyday investors, they only had access to 3%.
Wow, 17% versus 3%. That's a huge difference.
Yeah, huge red flag. And CoffeeZilla, he didn't mince words about this whole thing either. He called the shock launch one of the most miserable, horrible launches I've ever seen in my life. And this guy, he sees a lot of shady crypto stuff.
So for him to say that, yeah, that's really saying something.
Yeah, he was not impressed. And the evidence, it goes beyond just those initial token allocations. CoffeeZilla, he dug into the blockchain activity, all the transactions, and found these patterns that suggest coordinated buying and selling.
So not just a coincidence.
Not at all. It looks very much like a coordinated effort to manipulate the market.
And let's not forget, a lot of these investors, they were probably Welch's fans, right?
No, absolutely. That's what makes this whole thing so heartbreaking. You have people who genuinely believed in Welch, they wanted to support her, maybe make a little money along the way, and instead, they got wiped out.
Yeah, they lost their savings, their investments. We're talking about people who lost Tens of thousands of dollars, some even hundreds of thousands.
It's devastating. And it exposes this major problem in the crypto world, especially with meme coins. The regulations, they're practically non-existent. There's very little investor protection.
Yeah, it's like the Wild West out there.
Yeah.
Which makes it easy for these kinds of schemes to thrive.
Exactly. So where do we go from here? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, there are a lot of unanswered questions. Welch, for example, she's denied any wrongdoing. She claims that neither she nor her team sold any of their shock tokens.
Right, so is she telling the truth? What does the evidence say? And what about the victims, those who lost money? What recourse do they have? So we've been talking about this whole shock situation, the crash, the accusations, and it really makes you think, like, what makes people so vulnerable to this kind of thing?
Yeah, because it's not just about greed, right? I mean, sure, everyone wants to make money, but there's something else going on here.
There's a whole psychological side to this, these forces at play that can really cloud our judgment.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What's happening in our brains when we see, someone like Hayley Welch, someone we admire, hyping up a cryptocurrency like shock?
Well, one thing to consider is this thing called social proof.
Social proof?
Yeah, it's this basic human instinct where we're wired to follow the crowd.
Like safety in numbers.
Kind of, yeah. It's like a survival instinct, Back in the day, if you saw everyone running away from something, you probably ran too, without even stopping to ask questions.
Right. Better safe than sorry.
Exactly. And that same instinct, it's still with us today. We see a bunch of people getting excited about something, especially if it's something that could make us money, and suddenly we're afraid of missing out. FOMO, exactly. And FOMO is a powerful motivator. It makes us impulsive. It makes us take risks we wouldn't normally take.
And then you add in the fact that this is coming from Hayley Welch, someone people admire, someone they trust.
Right, and that's another psychological factor at play here, this thing called the halo effect.
The halo effect.
Yeah, it's this cognitive bias where we basically assume that people we like, people we admire, are inherently good and trustworthy.
So we transfer those positive feelings onto whatever they're promoting.
Exactly. And that can make us less critical, less likely to question what they're saying, even if it's about something as complex and risky as cryptocurrency.
It's like, well, if Hayley Welch is doing it, it must be legit.
Right, exactly. And it's the same reason celebrity endorsements work so well. We see someone we like using a product, and we're more likely to buy it, even if we don't really need it.
So we're basically letting our emotions override our logic.
Pretty much. And that's why it's so important to be aware of these biases, these psychological traps that we can fall into.
Okay, so knowing about them is the first step. What else can we do to protect ourselves?
Well, one thing is to be really wary of that parasocial relationship we can develop with influencers.
Parasocial?
Yeah, it's basically that illusion of having a close relationship with someone you've never actually met. It's super common with celebrities, but it's even more intense with social media influencers.
Because they're constantly sharing their lives online, it feels like we really know them.
Exactly, and we start to see them as friends, even confidants. So when they recommend something, it doesn't feel like a sales pitch, it feels like advice from a friend.
And we're more likely to trust our friends.
Right. So it's important to remember that influencers are running businesses. Their endorsements, they're often motivated by profit, not just by altruism.
So take their recommendations with a grain of salt.
Exactly. Now, another important thing is to do your research, especially when it comes to something as complex and volatile as cryptocurrency.
Don't just jump in blindly.
No, absolutely not. Take the time to educate yourself, understand the basics, learn how to evaluate different crypto projects.
There are a lot of resources out there, right? Websites, forums, even podcasts like this one.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask questions. If something doesn't make sense, don't invest. It's your money, and you have a right to understand where it's going.
So knowledge is power.
You got it. And finally, remember that investing always carries risk. There's no such thing as a guaranteed win, especially in the crypto world.
So don't bet the farm.
Exactly. Never invest more than you can afford to lose. And if a deal sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
That's some solid advice. So we've talked about the psychology, the risks, the need for caution. But what about the law? I mean, where do things stand legally with all of this, with meme coins, with influencers promoting them?
That's the million-dollar question. And honestly, it's a question that's still being answered. It's a bit of a gray area, legally speaking. So Where were we? Ah, yes, the Wild West of crypto, and whether there are any sheriffs around to keep things in check?
Right, the whole legal and regulatory landscape around meme coins. Like, is any of this even legal?
That's the big question, isn't it? And the answer, well, it's a bit complicated. I mean, in the US, there's no specific law that says, hey, you can't launch a meme coin.
Okay, but there are laws against fraud.
Oh, absolutely there are. And that's where things get really interesting. Because if those accusations against Welch and her team, the whole pump and dump thing, if they're true, then this shock launch, it could be considered securities fraud.
Didn't the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, didn't they crack down on ICO's initial coin offerings a while back?
Yeah, they did. And now they're kind of turning their attention to meme coins, especially when there's evidence of manipulation or, misleading investors.
So even though Shock wasn't technically an ICO, it could still fall under the SEC's radar.
It could, yeah, because the thing is, the SEC, they don't really care what you call it, whether it's an ICO or meme coin or something else entirely. They care about whether you're following the rules, whether you're being transparent, whether you're protecting investors.
And the SEC, they don't mess around, do they?
No, not at all. They can issue fines, they can halt trading, and in some cases, they can even file criminal charges. And they've shown time and time again that they're not afraid to use those powers.
So what does that mean for Hayley Welch? Could she actually face, jail time?
It's hard to say for sure. It all depends on what the SEC finds, if they decide to investigate. But it's definitely a possibility. I mean, if they find enough evidence to support those fraud accusations, then yeah, she could be in some serious legal trouble.
And we know some investors have already filed lawsuits against her, too.
Yeah, that's right. So even if she avoids criminal charges, she could still be facing, some hefty fines, some lengthy legal battles. This could drag on for years.
This is heavy stuff. But it feels like this whole Shock situation, it's about more than just Hayley Welch, isn't it?
Yeah, you're right. It's bigger than just one person, one meme coin. It really shines a light on the whole crypto space, on the need for more regulation, for more investor protection.
Because right now, it's kind of the Wild West out there.
It is. And unfortunately, it often takes a scandal, something like Shock, to really get people talking about these issues, to force some kind of change.
So what do you think? What does the future hold for crypto? Do you think we're going to see more regulation, more crackdowns?
It's hard to say for sure, but one thing I think is pretty clear. The Wild West days of crypto, those days are numbered. Regulators around the world, they're starting to pay attention. They're starting to realize that this space needs some rules, some guardrails.
Do you think that's a good thing? I mean, I know some people argue that too much regulation will stifle innovation, that'll slow down the growth of the industry.
Yeah, that's a valid concern. It's all about finding that balance, finding a way to protect investors without stifling innovation. And it's not an easy balance to strike.
Okay, so let's bring this back to our listeners. What does all this mean for the average person who's maybe thinking about investing in crypto?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is this. Be cautious. Be informed. Do your research. Understand the risks. Especially when it comes to meme coins, where the hype, the FOMO, it can be really intense.
Don't invest more than you can afford to lose.
Exactly. And remember, the crypto world, it's still evolving. It's still relatively new. There's a lot of potential, but there's also a lot of risk. And things can change very, very quickly, as we've seen with this whole Shock situation.
So it sounds like the key is to stay informed, to be skeptical, to not get caught up in the hype.
That's it, yeah. That's the best advice I can give. And always, always remember, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
That's great advice. Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into the Shock meme coin scandal. It's been a wild ride.
It has. And I think there are a lot of lessons here for all of us. Lessons about the power of influence, the dangers of hype, and the importance of being informed.
Absolutely. So to our listeners out there, stay curious, stay informed, and stay skeptical.
And until next time, happy investing, but invest wisely.